Uh, Good morning, everyone, again, and welcome to our fourth seminar in our series, The Power of Humour. You'll see that we're focusing our thinking on the relation between humour and peace building, and these are two, as we mentioned, very complex concepts. And this morning I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Prof. Lawrence Ogbo Ugwuanyi, who is a professor of African philosophy and thought at the University of Abuja. And he's also the founder of the Center for Critical Thinking and Resourceful Research in Africa, which focuses on African self-understanding. So he's held visiting research positions in South Africa, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, Edinburgh, and he's recently published on how Igbo proverbs on laughter kind of inscribe an African philosophy of humor. So today he'll be talking to us about a humor ethic in Igbo thought called Njakiri. I hope I've got the pronunciation reasonably right. As far as I understand it, Njakiri is a public kind of game of mutual insult, even between two adult males. And these are contestants who kind of throw harsh and contemptuous words at each other, but through the medium of laughter. And wow, this seems like a very dangerous but fascinating way to develop courage. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing much more about it. So Prof, welcome. Thanks you for joining us. And yeah, over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Andrea. I have a PowerPoint, so let me see what I can.
Okay. And I'm going to take my video off as well so that we've got more bandwidth. Okay.
This one. Okay.
Excellent. Okay.
All right. Okay, Andrea, thank you immensely for the opportunity to give this talk on Njakiri, a humor ethics in Igbo thought. I must say it's a very great opportunity for the chair in identities and social cohesion of Nelson Mandela University, South Africa, to give me this opportunity to share my thoughts on Njakiri. These thoughts, which I want to classify as falling within African philosophical psychology, philosophy of humor, is very, very significant in the sense that it extends the effort we are making in African philosophy to philosophize and reflect on the society and the mode of existence of the society. So somehow on the individual, because humor somehow also kind of touches the individual spirit, the individual mind. So, but the interesting thing here is that we're looking at humor from how a group practices the art of humor. So once more, I want to say that this is a very inviting offer. Now, first, I will say a few things about the Ebooks of Nigeria, from where I'm drawing this data. Then thereafter, I will talk about Square. Those who saw the advert for this discovered that there's a particular building that I applied to advertise this talk. There was some justification for that, and I will explain why it has to be applied. Then I talk of the nature of Njakiri. What does Njakiri mean? What does it aim at achieving? How is it practiced? Who practices Njakiri and why? Then thereafter, I attempt to interpret Njakiri. You know, I will see how we can read meaning to Njakiri. And then from there, I look at Njakiri in relation to certain theories that has been formulated by African philosophers to explain African life. Then I look at what meaning can withdraw from Njakiri? How can the knowledge of Njakiri improve the human phenomenon, social existence, and the wider reading of the human being from an Igbo African perspective? Then finally, I look at the future of Njakiri. This game, is it growing or is it not growing? How can it be improved? You know, what are the modalities to adopt? Assuming we accept that Njakiri is a human ethics that needs to be advanced. Okay, so who are the Igbos? The Igbos are one of the largest ethnic groups in Nigeria. They are the third largest ethnic group in Nigeria. Now, the Igbos, some writings say they are about 40 million. Some others say, no, there could be more than that. But the most important thing here is that population-wise, they constitute one of the third largest groups in the country. Now, the Igbos have strong migrant culture. Within Nigeria here, we argue that once you go to any state, after counting the indigenes of that state, the next who will be following in population will likely be Igbos. So they have it as, you know, a culture, and they also migrate beyond Nigeria to different parts of the world. The Igbos are highly entrepreneurial. They engage in business, industry, and so on and so forth. And I think the Nigerian community also strongly recognizes that. The Igbo life can be captured in the writings of the respected and renowned writer Chinua Achebe, whose work Things Fall Apart, celebrated as a classic, is based on Igbo life. And I'm sure those who have read Things Fall Apart will be at home with kind of things I'll be saying here. Some of the things I'll be saying here, maybe I think it will help them to also understand this better. There are a lot of writings on Igbo life. You have Nwala, Igbo philosophy. You have Opata essays in Igbo worldview. You have Okolo, Otako, and I have also done some writings in this direction. But perhaps one of the celebrated works that is very handy but deep and wide, multidisciplinary on Igbo life could be the work by Donatus Mwoga, Nka Nanzere, Focus on Igbo Worldview. It's a very little monograph. I think it's available online, but one who reads that work can draw a whole lot of lessons and learnings, messages about Igbo life. Okay, now having said that, I explained the Otobo Square or Ofu. Now, those who have watched the advert for this talk saw this background. So why did I place this background? This background is the building, the kind of building you will always get in an Igbo village square. And you can see the building patterns of this square are the same. These are different squares I assembled in just one town. And then, and you can see how the sitting arrangement is made. That's almost the same. Okay, so I mean, this also gives insight to call it Igbo architecture, call it Igbo health care, and so on and so forth. Because if people can consistently have this, probably they have also read some meaning into this, you know, in terms of the kind of relaxation it can afford them, and so on and so forth. Now, the one at the center that I applied has been reported to be over 200 years old. That's this one, 200 years old. And what inspired me to take on it is that somebody suggested that it was time it had a UNESCO designation, because something that people have consistently found valuable for this length of time. Okay, now, so to Njakiri. What is Njakiri? I have reflected on Njakiri, and I discovered that perhaps the best way to describe Njakiri is calculated caricature. Calculated caricature, meant to tease, to hurt, to abuse, and amuse, depending on the individual or the circumstance involved. So Njakiri, in my thinking, is basically a form of humor with possible heavy hammer. It is a heavy hammer because it can lead to, if you like, certain way of thinking that will help one to review his or her life. And it can also be a form of celebration. So, but the most important thing here is that Njakiri is a humor ethics. Now, there are some Igbo writers that have reflected on Njakiri. And one of them is Nwachukwu Agada. Nwachukwu defines Njakiri as a satirical and jocular exchange meant to amuse its auditors and probably meant to tease or abuse its victims. Okay, now we also have another scholar, Afame Borg. Afam, looked at Njakiri as one of the things you can always get among the Igbos, but he was reflecting on how far Njakiri has also mirrored the image of the Igbos. He argued that sometimes Njakiri could be mistaken as a form of boastfulness, okay? But then a wider reading, and as my presentation will show, Njakiri could be, if one goes through the Igbo thought scheme and attempts to be at home with the Igbo worldview, Njakiri could just simply be, another way of presenting a reality and to cause laughter. So I think that misreading of Njakiri can easily be corrected, maybe through a devoted attention to this work. Now, apart from these two authors, I have not come across other works that reflected on the theme of Njakiri. Now, there are possibly three types of Njakiri, three types, as I have been able to study it. Now, the first one is casual Njakiri, a casual Njakiri. It can come by a comment or like a story. Now, a casual Njakiri is something that one renders and then is simply meant to amuse people and even the person who is involved or person on whom the remark is made. My clearest example of a casual Njakiri was probably when I was 8 to 7 years old. I was looking for my mother, and then I was told my mother was in a woman's house, a particular woman's house, and I went there. And when I went there, women were gathered there, and one particular woman, I would like to say yelled or talked hard at me. What are you doing here? Arrest him, he's a male. Arrest this man, he's a male. And I laughed. We don't want to see male people here, male children here or males here. So I asked why. Later I discovered that those women were attending to a pregnant woman who was about to deliver a child. And then in those days, there was no maternity in our area. So they had these women who were traditionally skilled in helping women to deliver. So the fact that women were gathered there and they were trying to assist a woman to deliver a child, for them meant that it's such a serious business that any man that came around, should be arrested. And I wondered which one is my own. And what I read from it was probably that, well, since males or men are responsible for pregnancy, they cause the trouble in quotes. Any man that's seen there should be arrested. So that was my encounter with Njakiri as a very young child. So another encounter I had with a casual Njakiri was when I was boarding a bus in one of the cities in Igbo land, and I just entered the bus and I sat down. Then another woman who was also, heavy with pregnancy was coming in, and the driver just told the conductor, conductor, please be very careful with this woman. Oga has done his job very well. And everybody burst into laughter. Even the woman who was involved, it turned into a serious laughter. So these are the kind of casual Njakiri you could get among the Igbos. And it's very common, especially when you see them interacting with themselves. Recently, I went home, and then when I became a professor, well, not recent, actually, I've been a professor for a while, but at least recently I went home, and the title professor has its own status. I mean, even the learned and unlearned, they know that it means maybe coming to the greatest height of learning. So somebody now came and greeted me and said, Mbeke people are here, and then Mbeke Neba, and then Mbeke Adrago, and I laughed because what he did was to corrupt the Igbo word Beke. The word for English in Igbo is Beke. And so what he did was to corrupt that word and put it in such a way that it will mean another thing. Now, mbeke means things that caught something, someone that caught something or things that caught something. So just like we caught ideas, we caught words, we analyze things, he preferred to call me onye mbeke, you know, and generated a humor through that. Now, beke actually is a corruption of the word baki. And Baki is Mr. Baki is one of the first colonial administrators that came to Igbo land. So the name Mr. Baki was corrupted to Beke, and that is the Igbo word for English. So now casual Njakiri often comes when they can bend words, shift words, reconfigure words, and it generates another meaning and it sparks laughter. Now I had a friend who goes by the name Mba, and he married another woman, and then the surname of the woman is Mba. So another colleague of mine now confronted the guy and said, look, Mba has married Mba, and is now Mba and Mba and Mba. Now, Mba in Igbo thought is like yelling, like fuming, like shouting, okay? So the interpretation here is that yelling has married to yelling, and it will be yelling all over. Okay, so this is the kind of casual Njakiri could get among the Igbos, and they feel at home with it. Now, but the second kind of Njakiri is what you might call caustic Njakiri. Now, here Njakiri may be used to render serious lessons. You know, you could be, someone can deliver a very a hidden message, lead one to think deeper, and it can come through this caustic Njakiri. So caustic Njakiri is a kind of, if you like, abuse hidden through amuse. Okay, and I had this a singular instance of encountering this when my friend died. I think that was 1991, and then when he died, we went for the burial, and then when the coffin was about to be taken to the graveyard, there somebody parked a bicycle in front of the road, and people shouted, "Who parked this bicycle here? Will you come and remove it?" And then somebody by the side, raised a serious Njakiri. And he watched the man when he was driving the bicycle to the scene, and he said, "Look, if you saw this man driving this bicycle, you probably write to those who manufacture Santana vehicle to go and take permission from him so that they can reconfigure the speed of Santana vehicle to be as speedy as this bicycle." You know, people laughed. Okay, so the message was there that, well, you could do better than having a bicycle. You could do better by not advertising a bicycle, you know, in such a very serious gun inside the dead man. There was also this caustic Njakiri when someone delivered. The wife had already just delivered the 10th child. And when the news broke, someone close by said, well, we can consult the Super Eagle coach, those in charge of football in Nigeria, and maybe let them know that we have another football team waiting behind. The man has 10 children, and these days that female also play football, 10 children plus the man can form a football team. So we can just tell the Super Eagles, the football team, to hold some break, that there's another football team on the way. So this is caustic Njakiri that actually goes deep and is meant to lead someone thinking. Apparently, the question was, why could the man have that kind of leisure and interest in having as much as 10 children, you know? So, but the message was passed that way. Now, the third kind of Njakiri is Njakiri context. Njakiri context, and this is the one that is I strongly advertise. I advertise in this talk, and that is where you have two contestants in the Ogbo square. Okay, you have the two contestants in the Ogbo square, and then there they are exchanging. Can look at the Ogbo square again, and then they are there, and the crowd is there, and the crowd is listening to them. Now the aim is to see one whose talk will generate more laughter. one who will provoke more laughter. And then the winner becomes the person whose talk achieved this. And so in a particular Njakiri scene I watched, someone told the other person, look, your father is not a thief, but wherever he passes by, things gets missing. Okay, and I mean, everybody was thrown into laughter. You know, it was an endless laughter. You can see the contradiction. Someone is not a thief, but wherever he passes, things gets missing. And then the second contestant said, well, you see, when things get missing, they could sometimes be seen. But your father only sees clearly under the influence of alcohol. Sometimes when he's drunk and lands on a gutter walking home late in the night, he starts challenging the gutter for a fight. So, you know, and that's sparked a whole lot of laughter. And then the first contestant came back again. I said, well, yes. But have you forgotten that your father answers Ome Okachie? Now, every wealthy person in Igbo land could be called Ome Okachie or would want to take the title Ome Okachie. That is a wealthy person. The wealth never goes, it goes and comes back. You spend and it comes back. So have you forgotten that your father answers Ome Okachie? But he goes to buy groceries instead of your mother going to buy it. And then when it is time to prepare the food in the kitchen, he remembers that it's Ome Okachie. Okay. So, and then the second contestant could come and say, well, maybe that is why your father threatened to block a trailer lorry with his bicycle. And when he mounted the bicycle, he started pleading with everybody around to come and prevail on him from riding the bicycle to hit the trailer. Okay. So now these forms of humor, sarcastic, you know, okay, generates a form of laughter. So this is a kind of Njakiri by contest. Now, the interesting thing about this is that nobody feels hurt by this. So you see a situation whereby, you know, people derisively, you know, address each other, talk about each other's parents, and everybody's at home with it under the context of Njakiri. Under the context of Njakiri. Okay. So this leads us to ask the philosophical question. What meaning can we make out of Njakiri? How can it advance humor ethics? Can it achieve another wider, deeper meaning? Does it say anything about the human phenomenon, human psychology, social psychology, the making of a society, the making of a social group? And this is what I tend to attempt in my effort to interpret Njakiri. Now, in interpreting Njakiri, I will do two things. First, I will analyze what I call the assumptions of the practice of Njakiri. Then, secondly, I will look at what I call the Igbo irony that is embedded in Njakiri. Then, thirdly, I will look at some ideological functions that Njakiri tends to perform. Now, the assumptions of Njakiri. Now, from what we can see so far, Njakiri advertises a kind of consent by dissent. Now, the things that are said are probably things that are not acceptable to the participants, but they consent to it being said. So someone is abused and amused at the same time. Normally we talk of that there's a clear demarcation of this, even in Igbo thought. That Njakiri presents another phenomenon of this. Here, you are laughing at somebody and you are laughing with him. So someone is being laughed at and somebody is being laughed with. So this is one of the assumptions of Njakiri. And from there, I tend to see Njakiri again as what I call contradictory compatibility. Okay, so you see something that is a little bit contradictory. Okay, somebody, you know, is in quotes being annoyed and being happy at the same time, or should be annoyed, but is happy at the same time, deliberately done. So there's a kind of contradictory compatibility. So this again suggests that Njakiri may lead us to look at what we say or do or think and do within the context of what I call content, context, and context. Now, notice that it is not the content of Njakiri that is the issue, but the context and the meaning that is being derived. So the framing of what is being done there, or the meaning that being read, depends on the context. So meaning, there are often several meanings that can be ascribed to one thing. No one thing may have one singular meaning, or at least we have one sole meaning. There are different meanings that we can read from something. So meanings contest for each other. But Njakiri now tells us that meaning can be based on content and context. Okay. The other thing I want us to reflect on, the only time we can get reading in Njakiri, is what I call the Igbo irony. And the Igbo irony has been expressed in books. And I'll just cite about 3 authors that capture this Igbo irony. The Igbo irony is the fact that the Igbos have been studied to be people who have a lot of sense of dignity. Some people, that's why the word boastfulness, the other scholar will try to critique it. But then, when you read it, and if you read Igbo worldview, it should probably be seen as a sense of the self. Okay, defending one's self, by all means, protecting oneself. Okay, so Adiela Igbo says that Igbos are exceptionally humorous people, but there is nothing they hate more than being ridiculed or humiliated. Now, an anthropologist who researched on Igbo life, I think a colonial writer, J. Dennis, as far back as 1899, he lived among the Igbos, said among the Igbo, all carry themselves with a dignified air, or perhaps more correctly, a sort of swagger, as though the whole world belonged to them. And then Richard Anderson, an American anthropologist who studied Igbos in the post-colonial era, titled his book, The King in Every Man. So when we sum these ideas,
the king in every man.
So when we sum these ideas, we see an articulation of or a reading of the Igbos that makes us also have more interest. How is it that the people who probably have these tendencies can also have Njakiri, a human game that sometimes could often review your ego, review your pride, and perhaps sometimes review your words. How, why? Okay, so that's an interesting irony about Njakiri and the Igbos, and why I think it makes sense to have more interest in the study of Njakiri. Now, perhaps a possible reading of Njakiri we can make, perhaps based on this, is probably to remember that, as Ifeanyi Menkiti said in his classical work on personhood in African thought, which he drew predominantly from the Igbo concept of personhood. Menkiti himself was an Igbo. And each time one reads that work, I do doubt those who can understand that work without having a clear understanding of the Igbo worldview, from where he put his ideas and generated his theory. In this theory, Menkiti argued that personhood is what you grow to from one stage to the other. Is a progressive thing. And you become a person to the extent that you participate in the life of the community. You're acceptable to the community and you mirror the lessons and the ethics of the community. So Njakiri could also be a way of positioning someone to be accepted, to know what the society expects of him. They expect him to be courageous. They expect him to be somebody who can absorb harsh words, somebody who can be patient with another person, somebody who can be tolerant, and so on and so forth. So this could be a possible reading of the meaning of Njakiri, or the import of Njakiri. Okay, another meaning of Njakiri is also to look at the instructional and the ethical role of Njakiri. When I mean ethical role, I also extend it to wisdom ethics. Simply by rendering Njakiri to somebody, you've done your part. It's left him to think. People will laugh at it, but the person concerned might also think, especially the caustic Njakiri. Okay. Then the instrumental role of Njakiri is that Njakiri might also help to extend and expand the linguistic capability of the Igbos. Some of the words begin to get longer through Njakiri. gets longer, or rather get extended or get developed. I think developed. For example, it was customary to refer to the wife of an Igbo person as Oriak. That is somebody who enjoys, somebody, you know, who has come to enjoy. Okay, but recently the female folk have also discovered that, look, even someone whose husband is wealthy or not, or is barely surviving, also has a wife called Oriak. So they said no. Oriak is now replaced with Odoziak. That is somebody who improves the wealth. Okay, and this is probably because a woman has been called Oriak, and then maybe Oriak may also have been interpreted to somebody who squanders the wealth. So Njakiri somehow extends the Igbo vocabulary, and this is one of the gains of this this aspect of humor, this type of humor. Now, from the ideological point of view, again, we have at least two things about Njakiri that should be known. Seda Senghor, the African philosopher, theorized that negritude, the ideology of negritude, could be applied to capture the African, the Black African. And then negritude simply says, we share in the humanity of each other. I dance to each other. I feel the other. The other is in me. Okay, so you see Njakiri. Njakiri somehow also mirrors this way of thinking, where people laugh together, and somebody who's been laughed at is also part of one of those that laugh. Okay, so this is one of the possible ideological reading of Njakiri. The other ideological reading of Njakiri comes from the theory of vitalism. Now, vitalism is the thinking that among the Africans, the one's being is supposed to be strong to resist being diminished. Rather, it should be improved. So you are as strong as you absorb shocks or prevent shocks. That is vitalism. So you should increase your life quotient. You should always, at each time, increase your life quotient, and should not allow it to be diminished, and should do everything to resist it being diminished. Life quotient means now a kind of vitalism, the ethics of courage, resistance, and so on and so forth. And you must also add life to the other person. You should also add life to the other person and prevent the other person from diminishing life. So life at each time should also always be the vitalism, the life force should always be improved and increased. So these are also part of the meaning we can read from Njakiri. But in addition to this, I am thinking that Njakiri is also trying to, lead us to another theory of laughter, another theory of humor, or another theory of laughter. Now, generally, we think of laughter in terms of what we call the relief theory of humor, the congruity theory of humor, and the superiority theory of humor. The situation whereby humor is seen as what helps us to relieve ourselves, humor as what arises when someone thinks he has more wisdom than you, then he uses humor, it comes from humor. And then, or when things are contradictory. But I am thinking that my work is suggesting that Njakiri is also suggesting a theory of complexity, that the nature of the laughter or the nature of humor that one can read from Njakiri suggests a theory of complexity. What it means is that by generating Njakiri, for example, we are led to think widely. Okay, we cannot just sometimes Njakiri is not just humor, laughter, it's laughter with meaning. So it enlarges our understanding of humor, the possibilities of humor. Okay, so humor serves maybe to cope with, while serving to cope with the, it's also trying to tell us also not to oversimplify things. Normally, human beings like to oversimplify things, categorize things, simplify them, and then tell all their meaning to one section, to one end. It appears that the phenomenon of Njakiri is suggesting that we should take the phenomenon of complexity, the idea of complexity, perhaps much more serious than we have been doing. Okay. But another thing that I suggest that Njakiri is also urging us to think is maybe to the extent we should be able to assume that everyone can be at home with Njakiri, because there are also the psychological variables of individuals. So maybe Njakiri is also telling us to also be interested in that. Who is well positioned to locate Njakiri? Or do we just assume that everybody is fitted to enjoy Njakiri? Okay. The final aspect of my talk is the future of Njakiri. Okay. Does Njakiri have a future? If it has, what type of future? Now, the first thing we have to note here is that, like I said, Igbos have a strong migrant culture. So because of that, Njakiri may, functions more now with Igbos in the Igbo land, residing in the Igbo land. But even in the cities, when Igbos meet, Njakiri often comes to play. They exercise, they practice Njakiri and so on and so forth. So increasing urbanization might be a problem to the advancement of the ethics of Njakiri. Again, the village square that I mirrored, I applied to advertise this is also lacking. You don't have that kind of thing in the cities. And even in certain aspects of Igbo land now, what you have is large town halls and so on and so forth. And then these people simply come there to gather and make announcements and so on and so forth. But Njakiri often favors maybe a smaller group. Okay, so the building of this halls do not take this kind of game into consideration, and this is probably where we will also think that we also notice that there's a need to modernize holistically, or at least engage what we want to do in relation to what we are and what we have. Okay, so people who have this kind of game and who value this kind of game should probably make provisions for that. Well, right there in the United States, there's an Igbo village in one of the cities in the United States constructed. And the Igbos in the United States normally fly to that Igbo village. And one would think that they would have made provision for that kind of structure, which is, where they meet as a community and then in a reduced number, or where this kind of game can take place. Okay, but within Nigeria here, and perhaps in other countries, we are yet to witness the flowering of this kind of effort. But with the advent of knowledge technology, social media, one expects that with time, we might still see this game resurfacing, maybe in social media as a contest. And then people might also, be paying to watch it because it is something that has its own value, has its own principle, and has its own identity. And I want to trust that the creative competence of Igbos will lead them in that direction. There's never a vacuum in cultural advancement and growth. It's just a matter of time for people to realize that this is something that is valuable, and they will go in that direction. So I still think that along the way, Njakiri might go beyond the stage it is now. Today we have a night of 1,000 laughs, the humorists, entertainers all over Nigerian cities. They are there, fine. But one suspects that along the way, maybe Njakiri will be revived, or rather will be promoted or be modernized in another big way. And then it becomes a strong and valuable humor ethics. So I want to think that Njakiri is still there, but maybe with time, more will be made, more effort to be made, and it will also modernize, grow along with other items of African modernity through the Igbo experience. So I want to thank the audience, and once more, I want to thank the center that has a Center for Identities and Social Cohesion of Nelson Mandela University, Metropolitan University, for this opportunity to share my thoughts in this direction. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lawrence. That was there's so many questions I want to ask you, but I'm not going to jump in there and abuse my position because we can always chat after the seminar too. So I'm going to hand over to Jenna to manage the question and answer session, but just thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. And yes, we'll chat more. Okay, Jenna.
Thanks, Andrea. Yes, I just want to echo what Andrea said. Thank you, Prof, for a very energetic, passionate and insightful presentation. You've indeed given us a lot to think about over this weekend. I'm now going to move on to questions and discussions. And first we have Jason that has quite a few questions for you, Prof. So take it away, Jason.
Thank you, Jenna, and thank you, Prof. So I'll try and keep it to 2 questions, but there were many things that were interesting. And I'm also interested in the parallels with the tradition of rap battles and smack talk and things that are more familiar from a sort of broader African diaspora, which sound like they're parallel. But my 2 questions, something that popped up that was very interesting to me. I've just recently been looking at some sociology, and Cass Voters does this thing about the history of manners in European society, where he follows an argument from Norbert Elias that basically says that in sort of late medieval times, people were prone to be very violent because they were used to engaging only with a small number of people around them. And they were easily angered by misunderstandings with people outside of them. And so this expanding society with more trade and urbanization demanded the development of etiquette. And Voters argues that you can see a further development of etiquette becoming less formalized and less rigid and allowing more interplay and action. And something that strikes me as interesting about the story they tell there is it's very Eurocentric. And when I look at it, I can't help thinking, but lots of people have had sort of diasporas and trading networks and cultures of engagement and found other routes to engagement. So it interests me very much that there's also this, what you're describing is a kind of a way to diffuse tensions. It's a forced way for people who might come into tension with one another to acknowledge a context where that tension is diffused. So I think it's quite interesting to see it in terms of that social pressure release function of manners and of a shared context, which is what sprang to mind there. So that I thought might be interesting, that discussion that Cass Voters has about European manners and their civilizing function, and the parallels there, which strike me as quite interesting. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was that I wonder about, I recognize your description of the lady on the bus, and this, it's a very familiar experience, this kind of shared jovial, casual thing. But it does make me wonder about how live the option of consenting is, because you can easily imagine a very tired pregnant woman getting onto the bus and her first thought is, oh, this guy, or something like that. So it interests me sort of how live the options of opting in or out of a situation like this might be, and what that implies. But I think all of this is very relevant, as you said, to how we learn to engage with one another online, where contexts of discussion aren't very clear, and being able to see these things clearly as you're outlining the increased formalization makes an enormous amount of sense. Those were some ideas, but I'm very interested in that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jason. I see we have a question from Wulindlela. Right? Oh, I can't even. Wulindlela.
Yes, hold on a second. Let me just start my video. Hi, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, Prof, and thank you also, Iscia, for putting this together. I think I've got questions, but also just maybe some commentary, I suppose. Do you see any parallels to what seems to be an organized public display of humor being used to, as you say, work in a sort of contradictory compatibility way, and you talked about personhood as what you grow into from one stage to the other. I found that to be interesting. It's a very productive process in some ways, sort of community building and strengthening of interpersonal understanding. What I wanted to draw parallels to, if you do see any parallels to the organized public roasting, for instance, of celebrities, which has become quite fashionable in US media, as well as now in South Africa too, the sense of getting someone who's famous up there with their fans and friends, and then really insulting them in some ways, and offering elements of abuse to the person who's quite famous. And then secondly, I also want to ask the question of, like, when does the humor go too far, as Justin just sort of raised just now, that, you know, the idea of someone who could be a little exhausted or tired, or perhaps not necessarily taking the joke in the right way. And I don't want to turn this into a conversation about recent events with Will Smith and the slap, but, you know, the idea of when does humor then become a space in which you have to police, censor, and grow it, to keep it in that positive space. When does humor turn bad?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm glad to hear that humor has taken that shape in South Africa. When I lived in Pretoria, I know that it's Kaiser Chiefs and Orlando Pirates. One group, we you know, that kind of thing, they'll be blowing vuvuzela, and then, you know, it's not just a contest of footballers, but they are fine. So it's good to see that humor is also taking that shape. Well, I think there's a kind of correlation here, but there are, of course, a smaller group involved, and then this is also within a kind of limited context. For example, there are people who understand each other. That's the first thing. They know that this thing is happening within a context. So I think it mirrors that. But maybe the difference here is that you have a situation whereby it must be people of equals. You don't involve in Njakiri with your senior, okay, or with your junior. So there should also this reading that these are equals, and they have come there to, you know, generate humor, and then perhaps crack jokes, deepen and widen one's thoughts about a lot of things. So I think that's the major difference. That there's also a demarcation. There's a clear demarcation of who and who should engage in Njakiri, and where and when should it be done. Then about the limits of humor. Yes, I think sometimes humor again can be taken beyond, you know, the meaning can go far, especially sometimes those who are very formal are not often given to humor, that kind of thing. They are so nice, don't know, they want to hold to their own convictions and so on. So, but I think that humor, before you go to that extent, laughter might also downplay that tendency. Assuming you go and invite a police because maybe someone humor that you consider dangerous, and then the person comes with another heavier humor on the police and everybody, and then the police ends up laughing. You can see that you know, a whole lot of things we will go down. I mean, it will be very difficult. So somehow the formal angle is there, okay, the civil dimension of interaction is there, and then the civic, you know, this question of extending our psychical demands, the demands of the human person from the psychical angle, you know, making it healthy is also there. It's also very important. Okay, so I think societies are also recognizing that look, human beings are both physical and mental, and so a lot have to be done to also play on this aspect of human beings to create a balanced human being, and a balanced human being leads to a balanced society. So people are also very, very careful. Well, sometimes when you apply Njakiri, and then someone takes offense to say, I'm very sorry, this is just Njakiri. That could take care of it. I don't mean anything I said. I was just, you know, this is just Njakiri. But apparently before you say that, somebody from the background will tell you, but we're just playing Njakiri now. Okay, if you're not interested in Njakiri, walk out of this place, you know. So that social bonding and that social acceptance of Njakiri often helps to protect it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Vulindlela. We have one more question from Cien Onoja. Go ahead and ask your question, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Lawrence Ugwuanyi. I really enjoyed this particular talk, and particularly because it tends to mirror a certain kind of reality that somehow I am at home with. It's called Njakiri, and everybody, for the very fact that it's something that is humorous, everybody is directly or indirectly involved. So my first question is, what is the role of language with respect to Unjakiri? And I ask this question in two ways. Number one, that sometimes, whenever, for instance, this presentation you did it in English language. And I observed that there are some expressions in Igbo which you translated in English, but somehow or the other, you find out that the meaning is distorted or at least incomplete. Now, my question is, what happens to a situation where somebody is using a language that you are not fully familiar with? For this, I could remember when I was doing my NYC in Taraba State, that's Hausa land. So the priest that was preached there was making jest of a certain situation. People were laughing. And then when he translated what he was saying in English language, I didn't flow, I couldn't but pretend to laugh, simply because I observed that some kind of distortion of reality has been done damage by the virtue of the, the mismatch of language that was used. So my question is there anything that can be done, okay, with respect to the role of language in Njakiri, whenever there is the danger of translating one language to another? For instance, just like we said, Ome or Kachie, something like that, you translate to be a wealthy man. Yes, it's a wealthy man, but to me, it doesn't really fully translate Ome or Kachie as a wealthy man. If we are to take the literal translation of that particular expression into. Then the second one is Humour, you translate to Njakiri, and you say one of the dangers of Njakiri is the fact that, okay, on account of the urbanization, where the Otobo, that's village square, is no longer in vogue. And then you made mention that if it's something we can reintegrate in our society, it can be a way of, bringing back that, humor in Njakiri. And then I ask, in the cities, for instance, there are, concerts, comedies, and all that, that are being held by all these comedians and all that. To me, don't you imagine that this particular situation of what you sometimes they target a night of 1,000 laughs, and then people gather and somebody begins to make humorous out of maybe a particular situation or a particular person in the name of Unjakeri and all that. So don't you think such has taken care of the Otobo, that you made mention that the recent situation of urbanization and modernization, okay, has really taken away from us? So I think I'll end here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Onoja. I think that as regards what happens in the cities, the entertainment games of laughter, that is some difference. Remember that Njakiri sometimes takes the nature of a contest. Okay, people tell stories or narratives that maybe is deliberately coined in relation or as arising from the action or inaction of the other person. And there is this reply, himself or his parents or his relative or whatever. And then there is this a counter reply. So it's a kind of contest, which makes it very, very interesting, because It's not just something that you come out and reel out where some people just start laughing. Yeah, that aspect might be there, but if you talk of Njakiri as a contest, it's not well taken care of. Then secondly, remember that the Otobo is highly kind of a little bit interactive, like I said. It's interactive in the sense that you have a narrower group. So it also makes sense. Now, yes, there's urbanization, there's more growth in the society, more people are growing, there's expansion of population, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't remove that, if you like, a strong communal bonding that comes through Njakiri. Then secondly, also remember that Njakiri could be between maybe youths or children, you know, of the same age mates. They could practice it. Then elderly people of the same age mates could practice it. So I think there's also this age demarcation that comes into play in Njakiri. And so that will tell you also another dimension of it, which cannot be taken care of by what is happening in the cities these days. Then when you talk of the language challenge in Njakiri, yes, it is real, but this is also part of the challenge of perhaps a more creative attention to humor for those who understand the import of Njakiri. You could have a phenomenon whereby someone is rendering Njakiri in Igbo language, and perhaps it is simultaneously being rendered through whatever mechanism that can make it possible in other languages. Maybe it's translated and then everybody is watching or looking at the import of what the person is saying. These things are not impossible, especially if you want to also get more people to be involved in this, to have more value in this, and to be more connected with this art of humor. So I think the important thing is to see the value and to be disposed to expand the phenomenon of Njakiri and to see, to use it as a modern way of reinventing a humor ethics, okay? Given the numerous advantages that I mentioned. I mentioned the vitalist principle of African life, which Njakiri, you know, encourages. I mentioned how it supports the ethics of negritude, the principle of negritude, and mentioned a lot of other things. So I think there are some unique values that Njakiri tends to convey, which I believe cannot be subsumed in what we are having currently.
Thank you very, very much, Prof, for answering those questions so well. And the questions were fantastic today, I have to say. I'm going to hand over to Andrea, who's going to tell us about next week's presentation, which we're also very excited about.
Okay, and just before I do that, also another thank you. I mean, I've still got 1,000 questions that I want to ask you, so we definitely have to continue this conversation. I'm very excited about the idea of humor as a kind of way of training in complexity thinking. I think that's a fabulous thought. So yes, let's keep on engaging and discussing after the seminar. I'd love to do that. And thank you very much for kind of, how can we say that, a seminal beginning. There are just so many different directions in which one could take this. So wonderful, thanks. So next week is the Easter weekend. So we'll be on all hopefully eating Easter eggs and on a break then. But the next talk that we have, which I think will definitely continue this conversation, and that is, it's going to be a talk on jokes about Africans in cross-cultural contexts, and that's going to be by Dr. Izu Nwanko. So I think that'll be a very interesting extension of this conversation. So once again, thank you so much. A very entertaining Friday morning. It's a lovely thing to do on Friday morning, you know, a way of kind of easing out of the week and into the weekend. And I wish you all a great humor-filled, laughing weekend. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Cheers.